Okay, there's two things I want to do today, if we can. Number one is just a welcome statement to the people that are coming to this conference. I have what this conference is about in here. It's Exploring Super Performance is the name of it. And this is the first Texas statewide conference. And so, you know, like you to introduce yourselves, that you guys made history in '62, and these attendees are making history here in 2005, this first statewide ISPI conference. And just basically a welcome statement that we played at the beginning. And then whatever we want to do in terms of history and whatever is the second thing. Because we have
going to be down there?
Yes,
Okay.
we are the keynote speaker.
Oh.
We're introducing everybody else, but before the actual keynote speaker, we're welcoming everyone to the conference and saying we've been around for a while. You know, where do we come from? What was it that got us started? And because part of the message is super performance is we need to look at the companies that are doing it right, the places where there's new and exciting things going on, and what can we learn from them? You know, where the whole, because you know, Hilton always gives out this little placard to people who speak at our chapter meetings. It says, even if you're on the right track, if you stand still, you're going to be run over by the next train. Mm-hmm. That's from Will Rogers. And so the whole idea of ISPI and NSPI is if there's something new out there, we've got to look at it and see whether it works for us and what we, you know, how we can make improvements with it. And my introductory remarks are going to talk about the fact that, you know, the military, I mean, a lot of people will say, well, that's the military, that doesn't count. Well, that's where ISPI came from. The military needed the large budgets to take a whole bunch of young kids, get them through training in a reasonable amount of time. And I was just at the EOD school, you know, the Naval EOD school. If you don't train those guys right, they blow up. So you have high stakes training. And every time they learn something in Iraq, it comes back to the school immediately, and it goes into the curriculum.
Yeah.
So I mean, in the military, we really have training that's vital to the survival of the people who get the training. So we got to do it right.
Yeah, you know, we were having trouble when we did the occupational analysis of the EOD people.
Mm-hmm.
And your old friend Marty Dittmar was an EOD guy.
Yeah.
Do you know what my job was at Lackland? I was senior advisor to the general,
Mm-hmm.
and I was director of training
Mm-hmm.
and director of research.
Mm-hmm.
I never could type, but so I always dictated, and most of my people wrote hand because you knew how to type. But they write it by hand,
Mm-hmm.
and then give it to the typist. And even my brother-in-law, Dave Trice, you met Dave, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a GS 16 in Washington, equivalent to 2-star
Right.
general,
Mm-hmm.
and he typed the goddamn thing himself first, and he still. But now, of course, he's pretty bad. He's got 2 dementia,
Mm-hmm.
you know, diseases, and
And just for the record, how old are you guys right now?
I'm 86.
I'm 78.
Okay.
He's a youngster.
I know it's going to come up with, you know, you guys having formed this in '62, and you're still going. I mean, that's just, you know, amazing.
Yeah, I'm still active, but I'm not active in. Well, I do consultant work for my son.
Mm-hmm.
My son's taken over a lot of our stuff, like the Cameo Theater and the Zumbro,
Mm-hmm.
and the Zumbro was a bordello. It's
Mhm.
not a bordello anymore.
Right.
But anything near a railroad station was
Mhm.
also a bordello
Mhm.
in any country that I ever visited.
Right.
That was, you know, a rooming house.
Right.
Right now I'm herding a bunch of cats.
You what now?
I'm herding a bunch of cats, working with volunteers.
Oh, volunteer.
Right.
Okay.
Volunteers want to be led,
Right.
but to have their own, I'm a volunteer, I don't have to do that. Well, you know, whatever
Right.
and if you got 50 people, there are 50 different versions of that. I don't have to do whatever it is.
Well, I helped.
I was agitated yesterday when you called. I just had a meeting all day with them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I helped the boss in cooking. Of course, she has a master's in quantity cookery and institutional administration, and she was director of the cafeteria annex at UT Austin. All the professors like to go to her place because it was better food. Of course, I taught her to make spaghetti, and then she improved on it better than I did, spaghetti and meatballs. But by the way, in the South, I I was the one that introduced it because nobody knew what the hell it was in the South. Did you? No, people don't realize that. See, I went to Georgia Military School, and then Mercer University, and I cooked for the big shots because they never heard of it. And they wanted. And I did spaghetti picnics, and we did those up in Austin too. Go ahead, Walt.
Okay.
Whenever.
All right. The first thing I'll do is like just get the tape of you welcoming the people to this conference. And again, this is the first Texas statewide ISPI conference. And if you could say something like, welcome to this conference, the first Texas statewide conference. You in the audience are making history the same way we did back in '62 when we organized ISPI. And you can say, like, in this room.
Yeah, I thought, that I'd say that I'm sitting approximately where I was when the organization was born.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I like to get. If you start by introducing, I'd like you to introduce yourselves and say I'm one of the 7 founders of ISPI.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
To introduce your names, and then you're one of the 7 founders of ISPI, and then just take it from there. So anytime you're ready to start.
Okay.
Okay. You want to
No,
start?
what do you want me? What?
Introduce yourself,
Okay.
and then say to these people, welcome
To the first Texas statewide ISPI conference.
first statewide. I got it.
First Texas statewide.
Texas statewide.
Yeah.
Okay.
And tell them you're making history the same way we did in 1962 when we formed ISPI.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can. I'll zoom up on you first if that's. Okay, go ahead. Just introduce yourself and welcome the people of the conference, and if you want to elaborate on that.
Go ahead. You want me to go first?
Yeah, why don't you go for you, the senior person here.
Okay. I'm Dr. Mike Zaccaria, PhD, business industrial psychologist, and former chief at Lackland Air Force Base. Welcome to NSPI. Welcome to ISPI.
Okay. Good talk.
Hello, I'm Walter Driskill, PhD. I'm sitting approximately in the same place I was sitting in 1962 when I, along with 7 other people, formed the NSPI. At that time, we didn't realize it, I don't think, but we were making history. And so it is, I am especially gratified to be able to welcome you to the first statewide NSPI conference. And you too, as I understand what you're doing, are making history. And I hope it works as well as that effort that we made on that night in 1962.
Okay, and I'll cut there on that. Okay. Now, as continuing on, let's go ahead and talk about the history. Again, what are the names this is Hilton's information sheet that we have on the web. Are all those names, correct? Because again, the way he tells the story is that there were 7 people that got together, said we need a national organization.
Yeah.
And they wrangled over the Constitution and the wording and all that stuff. And then according to Hilton, even though we here in San Antonio wrote the Constitution, the people out in West Texas were the first ones to organize a chapter. And so later, we then formed our chapter here on September 17th, 1962. And you want to go over the names again, because I don't have those on tape. But who it was were the 7 people that worked on the Constitution.
You want to tell them? You could
try
read
it.
better than I can.
I'll try it.
I can't see.
Well, I can think sometimes.
Yeah. You don't have to read it. If you remember it, that's good enough.
Yeah.
This is just Hilton's version of history.
I gotta look at it to remember, to get the names right.
Okay.
Tell them we met at my house.
Okay, I might.
Yeah, we're currently at Dr. Zaccaria's house right now, and this is the room which NSPI, which is now ISPI, was formed.
Okay. Are you running?
Yeah, it's running right now.
Excuse me. As I just said, I'm sitting approximately where we were on that night in 1962, and where we sat numerous other times over the next few months in organizing the NSPI. Those who were with me that night were Dr. Gabe Ofeisch, Dr. Mike Zaccaria here to my right, Dr. David Wark, Captain James Gillespie, Dr. Harold Wren, who was a professor at Our Lady of the Lake University, and Dr. Carlton Downing, who was Vice President of Trinity University. We met many times over those next few months, and then we got the idea that we would put on the first national convention of the NSPI here in San Antonio. So then that occupied us for considerably over the next few months. The situation in training at the time that we started this, I think the zeitgeist was right for some changes to be made, because we were still bound by tradition in training and instruction. You have to remember at that time we weren't too far removed from teaching Latin because it was good for the mind. And so we were following tradition in training. And in the Air Force at that time, and still are, I suppose, we were spending millions and millions of dollars training people to do close to 200 different trades and occupations in the Air Force. The question was coming to the fore, are we doing the best job that we possibly can? And at that time, from a number of different directions, there were initiatives to look at how can we plan, deliver, and test instruction, training instruction, more effectively. There were some unique ideas in terms of the tradition of that time, some unique ideas that presented itself in what came to be the foundation of the NSPI. The idea that we do a job analysis and a task analysis was something that we really did not do. The idea that was really unique, revolutionary at that time, is that for every training session there should be written, measurable objectives. And following that the testing, performance or otherwise, should be written on those objectives. And then content could be developed. The idea that you would develop test items before you developed instructional content was unique and was revolutionary. And it's a concept that we very well need to be continuing today and explore how can we do this in the various types of instruction, whether it's in the public schools, the colleges, or whether it's in a technical training situation. We started incorporating on an experimental basis. We started incorporating the concept that we came to know as ISD, Instructional Systems Development, and I worked, I don't know, 15, maybe 20 of those experimental situations where we developed instruction in technical training courses based on the 5-step ISD model and compared it with conventional instruction. And in every case that I worked, the instructional system development model produced a better trained individual at testing at the end of the training than did the conventional methodology. Now, I do not understand much about what you're embarking on, but I am terribly pleased to hear that you're vitally interested in extending what started, 40 some odd years ago, extending that and capturing new technology, new ways of delivering training and instruction. Thank you for your interest in doing that, and good luck.
By the way, one very important thing that we made history on, El Tropicana Hotel was the hotel that we had our first convention at. And at that convention, we, in '62, had the first convention, and the first time all the rooms were filled. And by the way, Lyndon Johnson used to use that as his specialty hotel when he was president and come down here. And we made our mark on the El Tropicano. And by the way, they are completely remodeling it again, and it's something, you know, to be proud of. But we did have many conventions, and some of us rode around with Gabe Oldfish all over the country. You know, Walt and I had to go around with him different places, University of Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania State and stuff like that, and promoting it. And he was a terrific salesman, a super salesman, and he was able to get us, you know, the military to be able to go out and do all this. See? So, you know, pretty much we did that, but Driskill and I were the main leaders in instructional technology, you know, when it came to instructional technology.
So you were interested in exploring new techniques that were out there. Now, you've said NSPI a couple of times. Some of the people may not even know what that meant.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what NSPI stood for?
Well, it was National
National Society for Programmed Instruction.
Yeah.
Programmed instruction.
and-
Today we
and-
say performance improvement.
Now, yeah, now it's performance improvement, which is better. But we argued with Gabe Oldfish about that. But Gabe Oldfish was very rigid. He wanted to call it program instruction, and program instruction is just one technique. Instructional technology is what you really want. And Walt and I always pushed for that, you know. But Gabe never liked it, and of course, as a result, he would never really recognize us at meetings. He'd always be on a secondary spot. We'd be recognized, but we'd be recognized in retrospect, you know, that we'd be called, oh, we forgot to honor Driskill and Zaccaria.
From a historical perspective, two things I'd like to say. One of them may be of significance only to people who live in San Antonio, but our keynote speaker at that first national convention was Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez. And it was a very significant speech, short one that he gave that day, and I've always appreciated it. From the other side, other point, long before we formed the NSPI, we had, as I'd indicated earlier, we had been talking about how can we improve training. And we had developed some concrete ideas about what we might do. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier to Johnny Weissmuller, Mike came into the office one day and said to me, we ought to write a paper on that, which meant, in effect, write a paper and let me look at it. And
he was your boss, right?
And Mike was my boss, yes, and my mentor over the years. What I outlined in the paper, and which he liked, was a 5-step process for developing training. Job task analysis, develop objectives, develop tests for those objectives, develop your content, and then an evaluation phase. And over the years, after that piece of paper was put out, and I saw it come back from different places around the world, as a matter of fact, over the next few years. But within the next few years, I had the opportunity to head the Air Force's occupational analysis program, where I really got to put into effect step 1 of the ISD process. And I need to say, I think, that in those first years that we were doing the occupational analysis, that in the first 4 years that we were able to document in 1960s dollars, over $14 million that we were able to save by reducing training of those things that airmen in their jobs, in the Air Force, simply did not do, and they did not use the training that we were given. And if I had all night, I could talk about some classic examples of areas. I'll give one as an example. In a high technical electronics course, we were teaching a block of instruction on side-looking radar. And as it turned out, when we did the job analysis, we found that there were only 7 aircraft in the Air Force that had side-looking radar, and we had a traveling team that taught the people how to maintain that equipment at the base where those aircraft were located, so we could eliminate that training. And there are other examples that are just as striking as that one.
By the way, Walt Driskill was by far our brightest guy and most versatile guy. He was very versatile in being able to move from one direction to another. And, we always appreciated that. We had some pretty bright guys. If they weren't, we got rid of them. He remembers. One of them threatened me, Charlie Sartain. He threatened me when I said, I can't use you, but you know, you're just not smart enough. Son of a bitch would fall asleep, wouldn't he, on the job, and he couldn't do anything.
We can edit parts out, so that's...
Yeah, I know you can edit, fortunately.
Yes.
There was another example, John, that I would like to mention in the perspective that of how we developed courses back in those dark ages before the 1960s, that training was developed by a group of 4 or 5 people sitting around a table and saying, this is what we ought to present to these people. And in fairness to those people, first, they were handcuffed, so to speak, by tradition. And 2, we did not have the facilities, the equipment, the methodologies to do a better job of planning instruction. And so what they did, while we look back on it now and say, gee whiz, why did we do that? They didn't have anything better to work with. But given that as a background, one of the first job analyses that we did was on another highly technical electronics specialty that had to do with surveillance. The training in the course concentrated on 2 of those surveillance systems. When we got through with the job analysis, we had found 7 surveillance systems that the trainers didn't even know that existed. So I gave you an example of where we were able to save training by eliminating an area that really there weren't enough people doing it to warrant their being trained. We also were able to add to training by discovering things that people did that the trainers, for whatever reason, didn't know about.
Okay. Now, one of Hilton's standard themes is lessons learned. And he always clarifies that. He says, well, these are lessons that should have been learned. Because he talks about, you know, organizational change and how you could develop a really nice system. They developed this training system that uses slides, you know, slideshows. And they got the whole thing set up and were ready to go. Then they realized that they didn't have the support in the audiovisual department that could produce slides fast enough, you know, to actually make use of that. And so he always talks about lessons which should have been learned. And Hilton's, you know, standard comment is you got to enlist the top levels of the organization to commit to the change, to the training. Have either of you found that to be important in making change? Because again, if you're going to be avant-garde and test new things, how do you actually get it implemented? or any lessons you've learned in the politics of getting your ideas mainstreamed?
I'm reminded of an instance that Mike was on leave or had gone to some place on a visit, and he decided to leave me in charge. And a minor crisis developed similar to Hilton's example of the audiovisual people could not produce the slides. And I had to deal with it, and I guess I didn't get fired, so I guess I dealt with it all right. But it gave me the idea that from the evaluation standpoint, which has always been probably my favorite thing to do, is if I can evaluate things and do it where quantitatively, then I feel pretty good about what's going on and what the results were. But anyway, it gave me an idea that in the evaluation that we did of courses, how it didn't make any difference how it's developed. But in the Air Force situation at least, and I don't think it differs from anywhere else, that evaluation is not just a matter of evaluating how well your students did, how well your graduates did, whether they could do the job or not, but you needed to evaluate every facet of the training process. Audio-visual support, for example, and everything else that goes into putting people through training. And I put together a paper that suggested ways of looking at different aspects of the training program and evaluate them. And I still believe strongly that training the graduate is not a product of an isolated environment. It's not just the product of what goes on in the classroom. It's a product of the whole thing that supports that training effort.
And that reminds me of my trip to the Explosive Ordnance Disposal School in Florida 2 weeks ago, where they said that they tried a CBT, a computer-based training program, with a number of students. And they ran them through the CBT program, and afterwards they looked at the performance of the students and decided to put them back through the regular courses again. And part of what they were pointing out was all the instructors at EOD school are ex-military, they're now civilian, who've been out there, who've done the job, and know what it's like out in the field. And they tell stories, and they basically pass on the culture to the students and the emotional impact of being out there, not just the content. And so that was one thing that they said, that the CBT may have all the right information in there, but it doesn't end up in a person who's really motivated, dedicated, and part of the community. And that was one of the lessons I learned from the EOD school.
I think that's an extremely important comment. The idea in developing instruction, whether it be CBT or whatever, is, I don't know whether it still prevails or not, but I know it did in my time. I'll get a subject matter expert to help me. Well, in my experience, there is no single subject matter expert. And Johnny and I have talked about this many times, that in the business of describing occupations, we found that we had to go to numerous, quote, subject matter experts, because not everyone knows all that goes on in the specialty, and certainly not everyone knows how to do everything that's done in a job. So I would encourage anyone who's working in the development of training, don't say, I'll get me a subject matter expert. And I've had some fine ISD people, and I posed a problem. He said, well, I'll get me a subject matter expert. And that just does not do it. You've got to have several until you start confirming what others have done. And that's the approach that we use in occupational analysis, is that we We tried to find out where different kinds of jobs were being done in an occupation. And then we talked to a lot of people, numerous people, until we reached a point of diminishing returns, and we're getting the same thing over and over again.
You know, one nice little experiment we did, and this was before Walt joined me. I was working under General Dessard, who was then a colonel, and they gave me 2 illiterates from the Middle East that couldn't read and write in their language, and we taught them to read and write in English. And in the Arab world, just reading and writing becomes the difference between an officer and an enlisted man. And that upset all the officers there, just that little experiment. Mm-hmm. Another thing that we did, Dr. John Holloman, after I retired from Lackland, I was able to bring a research grant, and Walt used to be our consultant on that one. And we went and we did a lot of research in child care and stuff like that. And we also were responsible. Dr. Holloman's still alive. He just moved back to New Orleans just before and he got caught in it. But anyways, he and I, he's a black gentleman, he and I would go around and we integrated daycare throughout Texas. And that was, you know, quite a doing. And he was a great orator. He doesn't orate anymore. Much better speaker than I am. I'm a pretty good speaker, but he was much better. And they accepted him immediately. And you know, in those days, that was in about the later. Well, I guess it was later 60s, and upper 60s and 70s.
And didn't you later do a job analysis of Orange Goose schools? Orange Goose daycares? Was it you that did it?
What's that?
Did you do a job analysis of Orange, what is it, Orange Goose schools?
Of the Orange Goose School?
I think I did the data analysis for it. That's
Okay. No, Orange Goose School, that was a competitor of ours. He was Charlie Christian.
Oh, okay, sorry
We knew
about that.
him. Huh? We knew him. He was a nut. A
You
complete
did
nut.
that,
Huh?
you did that for
Jackie-
his schools.
Okay.
Well, we have our own. We had 10 nursery schools. Jack and Jill's.
Oh, okay.
No, Orange Goose. That was Charlie Christian. He was somewhat of a nut. He didn't know what he was doing.
Well, I think the mission of this conference, as I understand it, is needed very badly. And of course I hope and wish it great success, because we can look around us at things that disturb me. An article in the paper just today, for example, about is it the tax test? And we have a problem, I think, a serious problem with the way we are handling our testing of students. Having daughters and son-in-laws that are in the school business, teaching and otherwise, they're putting a tremendous amount of time into preparing people for the tax. The question I've got, and what disturbs me, is what are the objectives of tax? Have we defined objectives? If we have defined objectives, then there absolutely is nothing wrong, and we should be commended for testing whether students achieve those objectives. But we have to be careful that those objectives are not the end all, that there's objectives don't include the highest level of computational ability, let's say, in the field of mathematics. There are some basic mathematics skills that everyone should achieve, in my opinion. They should be able to add and subtract, for example, before they leave school. And there's a certain level of reading skill that they should achieve. But they do not have to achieve this extreme level. And if we're testing at that level, then that's why we are devoting so much of our time to teaching to the test, as you hear and read every day.
Yeah, one of the bad things about our education system in this country, by the way, my mother and father went 3 years to grade school in Italy, and they could read and write Italian and English. They learned English by going to night school, 3 years. Now, here in this country, our school system is terrible, in my opinion, because we do everything on the normal curve. And the normal curve doesn't have a damn thing to do about it, because you're throwing out the questions, you're throwing out the good questions, you're throwing out various questions, the ones that are too easy, the ones to put it on a normal curve. And the normal curve has nothing to do with it, and the president's completely off base on that. So everybody's trying to teach them the test. They teach them the test, but they're not teaching them really to read and write and mathematics and stuff like that. Because there you need some sort of an absolute system, rather than a normal system where you're not on the curve.
Right.
It's terrible.
What I hope results from the initiative, as I understand it, that you are going to be talking about and pursuing, is I hope that emphasis, attention can be given to how do we handle the idea of objectives and testing and determining what objectives should be and evaluation in educational programs, where in our time, 40 plus years ago, we were really concerned at that time about training, which is a much easier area to work in, because if you're training somebody to do the job, it's pretty clear that when you get through training them, you should be able to do that job. But now, when you get through with educating people, what should they have? And in my mind, there is a basic set of skills that people should have, and then there's a whole lot more that you should have as well. And I'm not sure we're getting that, and I hope this initiative will address
I personally
those
think we're not.
questions.
We're not. Our education system, I think, is terrible because of all these, and the president and everybody else is pushing this, the normal curve and all that stuff, which is a big, big mistake.
I actually have a website dedicated to what's called Education 2025, and the idea is that we have to look at what a citizen will need. If you're talking about grade school, what a citizen will need 10 years down the road from that.
Yes, we need an absolute system rather than a...
And what we're experiencing with our officer candidate test is that people are getting, like, we've had a guy take like 96 for a pilot composite, 92 for navigator composite, and 7 on a verbal composite. Because the whole study of literature and the verbal analogies, all that kind of stuff that used to be important in the educational system isn't there anymore. But these people, they can do the math, some of them, but no verbal skills.
If they have a calculator.
If they have a calculator. And the question is, does that make a difference? Because if they're in a jet, they're going to have computers at their fingertips.
Sure.
And so this is what my big mantra is, let's look at what the jobs are going to be.
Sure.
And if no one has to add in their head, why should we force people to fail because they can't add in their head?
Yeah.
And like I agree with you, Doc, that we need a certain set of minimums. But that's all we need to guarantee is the minimums. And
Guarantee a minimum.
you guarantee a minimum, and that's what your training guarantees. And for some people, if you have a kid who's a natural artist and he just can't do math, he'll be a success in life. No child left behind doesn't mean that every child has to meet, like you said, a normal curve on everything. And my educational plan is, let's find out what they're good at and accentuate the positive.
In the mid-1990s, I worked with a group of people who were submitting a proposal to look at the first test that was developed in the state of Texas. And in that, we proposed that we would survey employers and other sources and find out what is the need in today's life. Well, we didn't get the contract. I'll say no more about that.
Well, I guess that's about it, huh?
Let me thank you again
Okay.
for having this first conference, statewide conference in Texas. I have to say it's not the first one, because the first big one, national one, was in San Antonio. But I congratulate you for having it here, and I certainly congratulate you for the direction that I understand that you're going. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.